Hey everyone, excited to be diving into a topic today that's honestly kind of fascinating, female sexual desire.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things people are curious about, but it seems like there's so much confusion around it.
Right? Like it's this big mystery and sometimes even, well, kind of taboo.
Definitely. It's often shrouded in these stereotypes and whispered conversations.
Totally. And you know what? We're not going to shy away from it today. We've got a really interesting mix of sources for this deep dive.
Yeah, we've got medical perspectives, psychological insights, even some research on how men and women view this whole thing differently.
A little bit of everything. Should give us a good, well-rounded perspective.
Absolutely excited to see what we uncover.
Me too. Okay, so the first thing that jumps out, at least for me, is how much we try to simplify female desire.
Totally. Like it's just an equation, happy equals horny, or stressed equals zero libido.
Exactly. But as that Mayo Clinic article you gave us put it,
Mm.
uh, desire for sex is based on a complex mix of many things that affect intimacy.
And that's a perfect starting point because it really highlights what we're going to uncover today.
Yeah.
It's not an on-off switch. There's so much more to it. We're talking about hormones, mental health, relationships, even like medical conditions or medications.
Oh, so many different factors.
Exactly. It's this whole complex interplay of things, not just one thing.
That's actually really empowering when you think about it. Like, it helps us move away from those overly simplistic ideas about how it all works.
Totally. It's not about fixing something because nothing's broken. It's about understanding.
Yes. Okay, so we've busted that myth of, like, the simple equation. But get this, one of the academic studies we have,
Mm.
the title itself really jumped out at me. It's called Sexual Desire in Women, Paradoxical and Nonlinear Associations with Anxiety and Depressed Mood.
Yeah, that one's full of fascinating findings, I gotta say.
Seriously, like this whole paradoxical effect they talk about blew my mind a little.
Okay, so picture a graph, right?
Graph, you're gonna make me do math.
No, just bear with me. We often assume like less anxiety, less depression, that should mean more desire, right?
That's kind of the common thought, I guess.
So on a graph, you'd think straight downward line. But this study, it found that for some women, it's more like a U shape,
A U shape.
meaning both high GH and low level levels of anxiety or depression were linked to higher desire in some cases.
Wait, so feeling down could actually lead to feeling more desire? That seems so backward.
It does, right. That's why it's paradoxical. And they even give an example, a woman in the study who experienced this. It wasn't about feeling good in the usual sense, but more about seeking intensity.
Wow, so it's not just happy equals horny after all?
Nope, way more to it. They actually talk about celebratory effects, which
Hey,
is
nice.
that happy connection, but also comfort seeking, which is what we're talking about, desire linked to distress.
So like seeking comfort through sex when you're feeling down?
Yeah.
That's wild. Do you think that connects to like the idea of sensation seeking that some of the other sources mentioned?
You're picking up on something really interesting there. The study actually suggests that sensation seeking, that drive for new, intense experiences, could be a big part of why some women experience this.
So it's like we're wired to seek out those intense experiences, maybe even through sex, as a way to, I don't know, shift our emotional state.
It's a really interesting thought, right? And it points to the fact that desire is definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of deal.
No, not at all. And speaking of different perspectives, you mentioned earlier that we've got 2 studies for this deep dive.
Hmm.
The second one, that's where they brought in the guys.
Exactly. And I think that's so important, especially when we're talking about relationships and intimacy. It's not just about one person's experience, right? So this study looked at how men and women perceived the factors influencing female desire.
Okay, interesting. And did they find any big differences? Like, do men and women see this whole thing differently?
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. There were definitely some eye-opening differences. For example, the study found that on average, men tended to rank physical attractiveness as much more significant than women did.
Wow, so it's like what men think matters to women's desire and what actually does are kind of 2 different things.
Exactly. And that just highlights how important communication is. Whether you're in a relationship or not, recognizing those different perspectives, that's huge for fulfilling sex life, let me tell you.
It's like that's coming up a lot in these sources, isn't it? This whole communication thing.
It really is. And it's not just, oh, men and women see things differently. It's deeper than that, right? It's about making space to actually talk about what you need, what you want, even what your boundaries are.
And feeling safe enough to actually do that, right? Like
Yeah.
with your partner?
100%. And we see this in both studies, not just the one about couples. Like a truly fulfilling sex life, it takes vulnerability, trust, that feeling of safety to really open up.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about like the mental and emotional side,
Hmm.
but what about the physical stuff? I know some sources, like that Mayo Clinic one, mention hormones, especially around menopause.
Right, and that's a big one. Menopause is a huge biological shift for women, and with it, estrogen levels naturally drop, and that can definitely impact desire. Plus, you've got the physical changes too, like vaginal dryness that can make sex, well, uncomfortable or even
So
painful.
it's not all in your head. There's real stuff happening that changes how you experience desire.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important. Like, if you're noticing changes in your libido, especially if it's causing you distress,
Yeah.
talk to your doctor.
Yeah, it makes sense. They can figure out if it's like a medical thing or if there are other options, right?
Exactly. It could be hormonal changes, could be something else entirely. They can help you figure that out.
And it's not just menopause either, is it? Like, I remember that Baptist Health blog post talked about things like, what was it, diabetes, high blood pressure, even.
Yep, all of those can have an impact, and we can't forget about medications. That Mayo Clinic article mentioned how some meds, especially antidepressants, can really mess with libido.
Oh, yeah, that's a conversation to have with your doctor for sure. Like, maybe there's an alternative or a different dosage, something.
Exactly. Again, communication is key, but this time with your doctor.
There's that theme again. So we've got hormones, we've got medical conditions, medication side effects. It's kind of a lot to think about, honestly.
It is, and that's why it's so important to remember that we're talking about the whole person when it comes to desire. That's something the psychology practice blog really hit on, remember. Something about, contrary to this widespread belief, the female sex drive responds under certain conditions and to different factors.
It's like we're not just trying to fix low libido with a pill or some quick therapy trick.
Right. It's about self-esteem, body image, how we feel about ourselves, our relationships, even stress.
Yeah.
So many things play a role.
It really is a lot to unpack. Okay, before we move on, anything from these sources that really stands out to you so far?
For me, it goes back to what we keep seeing, that female desire is just, it's nuanced. It's not this one-size-fits-all thing.
Right, like there's no normal when it comes to this stuff. Everyone's different.
Exactly. And honestly, that's a good thing. But so many women, they feel this pressure, to experience desire in this one specific way.
Yeah, like if it doesn't look a certain way, something's wrong with them.
Exactly. And honestly, that pressure just makes it harder. Like, if you're always comparing yourself to some ideal, you're going to feel inadequate, right?
So understanding how complex it really is, that can actually be, what, like freeing almost.
Yes. It lets you look at your own experience with curiosity instead of judgment, and it opens up the door to figure out what actually works for you, not some textbook definition.
Love that. Now, you mentioned earlier how men and women perceive the impact of stress differently. What was that about?
Oh, right. The second study, they found that guys often don't realize how much stress impacts women's libido. Like, even though it's so common, it might not even be on their radar.
Makes sense though, right? We're expected to do it all, be partners, parents, professionals, everything at once. It's easy to end up pushing our own needs aside, and if our partner doesn't get that.
More stress, more misunderstandings. Exactly. And that circles back to communication again, right? If you're stressed and it's affecting you in this way, your partner needs to know so they can, be supportive.
Right. Otherwise, how can they help,
Exactly. And this isn't just about stress, that's the thing. Both studies really emphasize that communication. It's got to be about everything when it comes to desire, needs, wants, what feels good, the whole 9 yards.
So it's not enough to just know yourself. You got to be able to share that with your partner too. Sounds like that's a big part of a good sex life, huh?
Absolutely. It takes courage, being
Yeah.
vulnerable, but it's so worth it. That feeling of safety to really open up, that's huge.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Wow. Hormones, medical stuff, all the mental and emotional factors, this communication piece. It's kind of overwhelming when you think about how there's no one answer to what drives desire.
It lasts a lot, but it's also kind of exciting, don't you think? Desire, it's this complex, unique thing for everyone. No right or wrong.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, so for someone listening who's maybe struggling or just wants to understand themselves better, anything from these sources that could help.
Well, like we said, talking to your doctor is always a good first step. Rule out anything medical, make sure it's not medication side effects. But beyond that, I think it's about self-awareness. Pay attention to your body, your emotions, what gets you going, what doesn't.
Like a mindfulness practice, but for your sexuality.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to, experiment a little. Try new things, different kinds of touch. Figure out what feels good for you. And then, you guessed it, communicate that.
Communicate, communicate, communicate. Got to get that message out there. Sounds like this is a journey, not a destination, huh?
100%. And there's no rush. Take your time, be kind to yourself, and enjoy the process.
That's such good advice. This has been incredible, this whole deep dive into female desire. So much to think about. But before we go, we got to leave our listeners with something to ponder, right? What's your parting wisdom for them today?
As we're putting all this together, it's important to remember this isn't just about some abstract idea of desire. This is about your desire, your unique experience.
So it's an invitation to look inward, explore a bit.
Yes. And as you do, here's a question to consider. How much of your relationship with desire, whether it's high, low, wherever you're at, how much is shaped by what you think it should be versus what it really creates for you?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's so easy to internalize those messages about what we should be feeling,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to desire, right? We see it everywhere. But how much actually resonates with our truth? How do we tune out the noise and really listen to ourselves?
Something to think about, for sure. This has been eye-opening. Thank you so much for this conversation.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into female sexual desire. We hope you learned something new today. Feel empowered to keep exploring this part of yourselves. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep listening to The Deep Dive.